The Joe Rogan Experience.
You said, what about didn't Israel like prop up Hamas? Wasn't that part of their strategy for a while? And I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, and maybe he just doesn't know about that detail of this as much, because if not, he was kind of being dishonest. But maybe he just wasn't familiar with all of this stuff. But he kind of went, you said that, and then he kind of dismissed it by saying, well, there's a quote that's attributed to Netanyahu, but it wasn't on videotape. So like essentially being like, we don't really know if Netanyahu said this or not, and then just kind of moved on to the conversation away from that. But I found this in all of my debates that I've done on this, and I've done like 8 debates on this since the war broke out. Everybody on the pro-Israeli side does not want to grapple with that point, because it really is like it's a narrative shattering point once you acknowledge it. But if it isn't on videotape, he has a point as well. Well, so here's the deal, right? So the quote that he's referring to was a quote by Benjamin Netanyahu. It was something along the lines of, anybody who wants to thwart the Palestinians having their own state needs to support propping up Hamas, bolstering Hamas, transferring money to them to maintain, right? So there was a quote like this.
So Hamas maintains power.
Right. So Hamas maintains power so that we never have to give them a state, because we can look to the international community, we can look to liberal Jews in Israel and say, look, we have no partner for peace. They're a crazy terrorist group, so we never have to make a deal. We don't have to fulfill our promise that we would give.
How was this attributed to him?
So basically, this quote particularly, okay, this was at a closed-door meeting with the Likud party. So this is Benjamin Netanyahu's political party, his far-right party that's in power right now in Israel. So it's true that this was a closed-door meeting and that it's not on tape. So what happened is, as far as I could tell, the first person who reported this, I believe, was a lady who's a reporter for the Jerusalem Post. And then it's been run in a bunch of other newspapers since then. So what happened is, an eyewitness who was there at the meeting, so another Likud party member in Benjamin Netanyahu's political party, came and told her that he said this. And then she went and checked with somebody else who was there, and he also confirmed that, like, yes, Benjamin Netanyahu said this. And then a third person who was also at the meeting came out and wrote about it in his book, or wrote about it in another newspaper article or something like that. So you had 3 eyewitnesses from within his own political party who confirmed that he said this. Now, take that for what it's worth. I think that's reasonably strong, that 3 eyewitnesses all in his political party said that.
As long as they weren't trying to get rid of him. Because you can get more than 3 people to say that Donald Trump was in collusion with Russia.
Sure. So even say if you don't trust them, Coleman acted as if that's what the entire case is built off of, which is just not true at all. It's not just this one Benjamin Netanyahu quote. It's dozens and dozens of quotes from Israeli leaders all throughout the political spectrum. There's been reporting on this done by almost every major Israeli newspaper. Haaretz, Times of Israel. The Times of Israel on October 8th had a piece by Tal Schneider, which was how how Netanyahu's support for Hamas just blew up in his face. It was the next day. And because even critics like Ehud Barak, who was the former prime minister, he's a Labor Party, he's a critic of Benjamin Netanyahu. So he was a critic of this plan to prop up Hamas. But it's totally uncontroversial that this was their plan. The New York Times just ran a piece, I think it was late last year, it might have been early this year, where they talked about how 2 weeks before October 7th, Benjamin Netanyahu sent the head of the Mossad to Qatar because funds going into Hamas had slowed down. And he sent them in there to make sure the funds continued. It's the case for this is overwhelming. It's not like relying on one. Yeah, here you go.
Yeah, for years the Qatari government had been. Am I saying that right? Is that how you say it?
Qatari, I think, is
Qatari
correct.
Government had been sending millions of dollars a month to the Gaza Strip, money that helped prop up the Hamas government there. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel not only tolerated those payments, he had encouraged them. According to Times, Israeli intelligence agents traveled to Gaza with a Qatari official carrying suitcases filled with cash. Yep. Suitcases, like a mafia movie, to disperse money. Retired Israeli General Shlomo Brom described the logic of Netanyahu's position. One effective way to present a 2-state solution is to divide...
Prevent.
prevent a two-state solution is to divide between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. If the extremist Hamas ruled Gaza, then the Palestinian Authority, a compromise comprador government, is that how you say it? Comprador? I don't even know what that is. Comprador government with a tenuous hold on the West Bank would be further weakened. This, according to Brahm, would allow Netanyahu to say, I have no partner.
And so that's okay. So that's essentially the point there, right?
So that's a strategy.
He can say, I have no partner for peace, which is the Israeli line that they like to use. So basically, okay, in 1979, the Egyptians and the Israelis met at Camp David, and that's when they worked out their peace. Now, their peace also just involved basically that the U.S. would pay them both off. We'd give them both $3 billion a year in perpetuity if they stopped going to war with each other, basically. And part of that was that Israel promised that they would eventually give the Palestinians a state. Like, it was recognized by D.C. at the time, this is Jimmy Carter, that, like, you got to give them a state because otherwise this fighting is going to continue on and on and on forever. So they promised that. Eventually, they would give it to them.
This is the Yasser Arafat days.
This is before Yasser Arafat was like the guy, but he was alive. But then in the 80s, Yasser Arafat basically rejected terrorism. He had been involved in terrorism before that. He rejected terrorism and he recognized Israel. I think it was in 1988. He recognized Israel's right to exist under 1967 borders. So basically, Israel has the right to exist, but we have the right to Gaza and the West Bank. The ultimate of compromises from the Palestinian perspective, because, you know, a lot of their more hardcore guys are like, no, all of this was ours.
Right.
We shouldn't have lost any of it. And now even the original U.S. partition plan, which was rejected by the Arabs for, you know, fairly good reasons, they rejected it because it gave 55% to the Jews and only 56% to the Jews and only 44% to the Palestinians. And they were like, but we're like 90% of the population here, like, or 90% of the landowners here, or whatever. And it's like, this isn't fair. But now at this point, they're talking about 78% versus 22%. So they're accepting 22%. And so that's Yasser Arafat in the late 80s. And then this is what set the stage for the Oslo Accords in the early 90s. And this is like famously when Bill Clinton has Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat over, and they shake hands and they sign these deals. And the promise again from Israel was that we're starting the peace process to eventually give the Palestinians their state. This is the process. And there were steps along this process. Okay? Now, in 1996, Benjamin Netanyahu becomes prime minister. Now, the same year in 1996, there's this letter. You can find this on the internet. It's called A Clean Break, A New Strategy for Securing the Realm. And it was written by Richard Pearl and David Wormser and a couple other people. Of course, Richard Pearl and David Wormser both went on to be very influential neoconservatives in the George W. Bush administration. So they write this letter, not to President Bill Clinton and not to Bob Dole, who was running for president on the Republican ticket that year. They write this letter to Benjamin Netanyahu, the new prime minister of Israel. And basically, if you read it, what they say is that they're like, look, you guys are all caught up in this peace process thing where you're talking about giving the Palestinians land. We need a clean break from that strategy. And we're going to have a whole new strategy. And what it's going to involve is you making agreements with the broader Arab world so that you don't have to make this agreement with the Palestinians. You see, the old way of thinking was always that Israel will never be able to make peace with the broader Muslim world because they're furious about what you're doing to the Palestinians. But the clean break strategy was like, no. You're going to embark on what ultimately became the Netanyahu doctrine, that will make it deals with the rest of the Arab world so we don't have to give up this land. And you know what they recommended, these two neoconservatives in 1996, and I bet you'll never guess this, Joe, regime change in Iraq for the security of Israel. That was in 1996. And these people got in George W. Bush's government. And after 9/11, those same people decided that they believed that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and that he was involved in 9/11. Yeah.
So there it is. Israel can shape its strategic environment in cooperation with Turkey and Jordan by weakening, containing, and even rolling back Syria. This effort can focus on removing Saddam Hussein from power in Iraq, an important Israeli strategic objective in its own right, as a means of foiling Syria's regional ambitions. And here's where it gets crazy. How much of what a great job the Mossad did in compromising people, by the way. I mean, how much of an effect did that have in everything? You know, you can go full Eddie Bravo and think everything that's happening is because of Epstein Island. And I used to dismiss that a lot more easy than I do now.
Maybe not everything.
A lot.
But certainly some stuff.
Some things.
Well, look, you will see this. You will see this. And I'm not saying that Epstein is the sole reason for this type of stuff. There's several different reasons. But you see this all over the political sphere, and especially amongst like conservative commentators, where as soon as Israel's mentioned, whatever their principles were that they were just rolling with are like gone.
Yeah.
Like it's a totally different thing. And I get that. I get there's a reason for that too. Of course, like what Jewish people have been through in the 20th century, in the 19th and 18th century, like that plays a part in that too. But there's no question that like it's not just Epstein. It's also, and I highly recommend people read, John Mearsheimer has a great book called The Israeli Lobby. There's also this lobby, AIPAC, which is a very, very powerful lobby. The truth is that every U.S. president, since, with perhaps the exception of Trump, I'm actually not sure about that, but every U.S. president since Jimmy Carter, I know for sure, excluding Trump, every one of them wanted a two-state solution. Every single one of them. None of them were able to get it done. Even though we bankroll Israel. You'd think it'd be fairly easy for us to like put pressure on the country that's relying on us. Like, okay, we'll keep supporting you, but you got to do this. Nope. Even when they go over and say, we want to do this, they're not able to do that. And part of that is because of the lobby. Part of that is because there's like tens of millions of evangelical Christians in this country who believe that the Jews have to control Israel, like in some religious view that Jesus can't come back unless the Jews control him or something like that. I don't exactly understand it.
They go there on tour. They have tours they go there.
Well, and they also, and the Israeli government's well aware of that, and they're well aware of how much they benefit from that, so they do everything they can to facilitate that belief.
White dudes with golf shirts.
Yeah, that's right. They're a big force. They're a really big block in this country. There's not like a few dozen of them. Like they're
willing to throw some real money at bringing Jesus back.
Yes, they're very, that's a very big deal to them. But look, like there's all of these U.S. presidents, they've wanted an outcome that they're unable to get. And you can look, there's this one video of Benjamin Netanyahu where he doesn't know he's being recorded, and he's speaking openly about this. And it's so he openly starts bragging about how he basically blew up the peace process and how he basically. There's
a recording of this?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's in Hebrew, but it's translated and it's legit. It's been translated by like a whole bunch of different people. And he's bragging about how he put all of these poison pills into the peace agreement. Like he was like, oh yeah, sure. We'll grant, I agreed to grant them a state, but only after it was determined that we could Israel could control like military, like important military areas. And then he was like, I also snuck it in that only Israel gets to define what the military important areas are. And I decided that a third of the West Bank is that. And like he's bragging about how he tricked Bill Clinton and how easy it is to move the Americans. It's wild. Like there's a lot of power plays at work here. And the only other thing I'll say about this, and it's not just like the neoconservative, the clean break, the strategy that they wrote for Netanyahu. It's that, so in 2002, Benjamin Netanyahu comes and testifies before Congress as a regional expert. And he testifies that like, oh yeah, no, if you guys overthrow Saddam Hussein, democracy will sweep the region. Let me tell you, I know something because I know this region better than anyone else. And at one point, Dennis Kucinich actually grilled him and got him on record. And he goes, is there anybody else that you're advocating that we preemptively attack? And Netanyahu goes, yeah, Iran. Attack them too. So I'm not like, I don't hate Israel. Like, I think Israel's a cool country. I think what they do to the Palestinians is fucked up and it's inexcusable and they should stop. But I think Israel is a cool country. There's a lot of great things about them. But like Netanyahu, this guy who's the longest serving prime minister in Israeli history, has been trying to get America into wars that are in his interest, that are very clearly not in ours. And the fact that we have to like unconditionally support Israel, even when our own democratically elected president doesn't like the policies that they're enacting, and yet they still get all of this support,